They said I was wasting my life just playing with computers while my brother made the family proud. I stayed quiet. Until one night, at his engagement dinner, his fiancée looked at me and froze. "Wait, you're the founder of MedLink." That moment changed everything. In this story, I'm going to tell you what really happened behind that $200 million company, why I kept it a secret, and what it means to build something when no one believes in you. Stay with me, because if you've ever been told you weren't enough, this is for you. My name is Rachel Carter. I'm 33 years old, and tonight I watched my family stare at me like they were seeing a ghost. Not the spooky kind, the kind they forgot existed until it stood in front of them, uninvited by their memory. We were at Blue Orchid, one of San Francisco's most exclusive rooftop restaurants, for my younger brother's engagement party. Ethan Carter, charming, accomplished, the brilliant son who followed in my father's footsteps to become a doctor. The restaurant was lit in soft gold, tables dressed in white linen, waiters gliding silently in tailored black. The whole setting looked like something out of a magazine spread for success and the families who inherited it. I arrived precisely at 6:30 p.m., not early enough to be roped into setup duties, and not late enough to draw attention. Just neutral. That's how I've learned to survive family functions, dress appropriately, speak only when spoken to, and never mention work. As I approached the private dining room, the hostess greeted me with a professional smile that faded slightly when I gave my name. "Ah, you're with the Carter party." She scanned the list. "We've seated you near the windows. Right this way." I was led past the main table, long and candlelit, where my parents sat laughing with Ethan and his fiancée, Samantha. I wasn't surprised not to be seated near them. I was used to being on the edges, both physically and emotionally. When my mother finally noticed me, her expression flickered for half a second before settling into forced warmth. "Oh, Rachel. Good, you made it. We've put you next to Aunt Lauren. She gets nervous around strangers." Aunt Lauren was nearly deaf and forgot most names, including mine, but I nodded and thanked her as if the placement was thoughtful rather than strategic. Dinner began. Toasts were raised. My father stood and spoke about Ethan's journey from model airplane kits to medical school interviews. My mother followed, describing Samantha as a woman of grace and intelligence, the kind of daughter-in-law she always hoped for. Her eyes never once met mine during the speech. I sat quietly, sipping wine and slicing through roasted duck I didn't have much appetite for. It was during the second course, a beet and burrata salad, that had happened. Samantha, seated across from me, paused mid-sentence. She tilted her head, studying me like something was clicking into place. "Wait," she said. "Rachel Carter. Are you the Rachel Carter behind MedLink?" My knife paused over the salad. A few people turned. I looked at her, calm but inwardly bracing. "Yes, that's me." There was a beat of stunned silence. Ethan's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. My father blinked. My mother stiffened so slightly that only I would have noticed. Across the table, the laughter and small talk faded into quiet. "You're the co-founder and CEO of MedLink," Samantha repeated, more to herself than anyone. "I've been reviewing your platform for months. I had no idea." She looked from me to Ethan, then to my parents. I set down my fork gently and took a sip of water. It wasn't exactly dinner conversation. But my mother began, her voice faltering. "You never told us. You said you worked in tech." "I do," I said softly. I just didn't elaborate. No one asked. My father finally spoke. "MedLink, That's the health communications platform, the one with the AI-driven patient interface. I nodded. He blinked. You built that? I met his eyes. Yes. Naomi Lee and I founded it 6 years ago. Samantha looked around the table, suddenly aware that she was the only one truly grasping the significance. MedLink is in final stage acquisition talks with my company. We're offering over $200 million. Someone dropped a spoon. I think it was Cousin Daniel. My mother's face tightened. She tried to recover, laughing softly, falsely. Well, we always knew you had a knack for computers. No, you didn't, I said, gently but firmly. You always thought I was wasting my time. It wasn't said with anger, just a fact laid bare. Ethan stared at me, the look on his face somewhere between awe and confusion. Why didn't you tell us I wanted to succeed without having to defend my path, without having to earn your belief first? I guess I was tired of asking to be taken seriously. The silence that followed wasn't cruel, just heavy, a kind of collective reckoning. My mother looked like she might say something, then decided against it. My father looked old, somehow, like he'd missed a chapter in a story he thought he knew by heart. Samantha, bless her, tried to bridge the moment. Your interface design reduced errors at Boston General by over 60% in the first year. The entire team is in awe of the build quality and scalability. I honestly can't believe I'm just now making the connection. I prefer to keep a low profile, I replied, offering a small smile. It's less complicated that way. And then I went back to eating my salad, as if I hadn't just cracked the foundation of the Carter family dinner table. They didn't know what to say. I didn't need them to. The truth had done all the talking. Before MedLink, before the rooftop restaurant, before Samantha's stunned recognition and my parents' stunned silence, there was Pasadena. I grew up in a 2-story colonial-style home just off South Orange Grove Boulevard, the kind of neighborhood where lawns stayed trimmed year-round and children were expected to become someone by the time they hit 25. My parents, Richard and Margaret Carter, had done exactly that. My father was a neurosurgeon. My mother, a high-powered immigration attorney who, as she often reminded us, never lost a case. There were no trophies for curiosity in our house, only for achievement. Dinner was served at 6:30 sharp. The table was long, polished, and more ceremonial than warm. We didn't talk about feelings or favorite colors. We talked about progress. Ethan, 4 years younger than me, always had something to offer: a science fair ribbon, a glowing report card, a recommendation letter from a professor he'd met during a hospital tour. And what about you? Rachel, my mother would ask, eyes already drifting toward the salad bowl. I remember being 12 and proudly announcing I'd taught myself basic HTML. I had built a website where the buttons actually lit up when you hovered over them. I'd stayed up half the night to figure it out. My father looked unimpressed. That's cute, he said. But what are you doing for the debate team? You know, colleges want more than hobbies. I wasn't on the debate team. I hated public speaking. I preferred the silence of code, where logic made more sense than people ever did. They didn't get it. Maybe they didn't want to. My bedroom was the only space in that house that felt like mine. The walls were papered with flowcharts, sticky notes, and hand-drawn interface ideas. I built things, tiny apps that sorted homework, generated birthday reminders, even one that tracked my mom's court schedule just for fun. It wasn't that I lacked ambition. It's that my ambition didn't wear a white coat or carry a leather briefcase. Ethan's room, meanwhile, looked like a catalog ad for achievement, glossy plaques, framed acceptance letters, team photos. My mother had even gotten his lab coat dry cleaned and pressed before his first summer internship at the age of 16. No one ever cleaned my keyboard. I don't think they meant to hurt me. Not deliberately. It's just that I didn't fit the mold. My success didn't look like the kind they knew how to measure. And so they called it a phase. When I chose computer science as my intended major, my mother sat me down like I had confessed to a crime. "You have the grades for pre-law," she said. "You're wasting that potential on, what? Gaming?" "I'm not gaming," I replied quietly. "I want to build tools that help people." She gave me the smile she reserved for ridiculous things like horoscopes or pineapple on pizza. "Sweetheart, real change happens in courtrooms and hospitals, not on computer screens." That was the first time I realized I'd have to build my life without their belief. At 16, I entered a regional coding competition. My final project was an inventory management app designed for school fundraisers. I wrote every line of it myself. I stayed up for nights testing bugs, optimizing memory, refining the interface. The competition was scheduled the same weekend as Ethan's acceptance dinner for the USC pre-med program. When I told my parents about the conflict, my mother barely blinked. "Oh no, Rachel, this weekend's for your brother. Can't you reschedule the tech thing?" It wasn't a tech thing. It was the first time I felt like I might be seen. I went anyway. Alone. I wore my best jeans and the only blazer I owned. While other kids arrived, flanked by cheering parents and camera phones, I walked into the auditorium with a USB stick and a knot in my stomach. And I won. First place. Out of over 100 students. The judges, real developers. Not teachers or parents, told me my idea had market potential, that I had an eye for systems. I clutched the little crystal trophy all the way home. I didn't even wait for an Uber. I took the bus. When I walked into our house, my parents were laughing with relatives in the living room, champagne glasses in hand. Ethan stood beside them in a blazer my mother had bought just for the event. I stood quietly in the doorway, waiting for someone to notice. My father finally looked up. "Oh, there you are," he said. "Did you eat?" I held up the trophy. He smiled politely. "That's wonderful." "Honey, you can tell us about it later." He turned back to toast Ethan. My hand tightened around the base of the trophy. It didn't feel like victory anymore. It felt like invisible ink. That night, I sat in bed staring at my laptop screen. I created a folder titled Someday. I filled it with screenshots of my app, photos from the event, notes from the judges. I told myself, build something so undeniable. They can't pretend not to see it. But that dream, even then, wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making them sorry. It was about making peace with the fact that I might never get their pride, and building anyway. I used to wonder what it might feel like if they had understood me from the beginning. If they had looked at my lines of code the same way they looked at Ethan's lab results. If they had asked, just once, to see what I was working on. But they didn't. And eventually, I stopped waiting. Pasadena taught me that love, in some families, is conditional, tied to performance, to predictability, to conformity, but self-worth. That's something you learn to write for yourself, line by line, loop by loop. Until one day, you realize the code never needed to be approved to run. The summer before college, my mother handed me a manila envelope with the word options scribbled across the top in her signature black ink. Inside were printed brochures from Yale, Stanford, Columbia, all with strong pre-law programs, a silent directive, a list of lives I was allowed to consider. I was already holding my acceptance letter to the University of Washington. When I told my parents I wouldn't be applying to the Ivies, that I'd accepted a merit scholarship to study computer science in Seattle, their silence was louder than any argument. My mother blinked like she hadn't heard me correctly. My father leaned back in his chair, pressing his fingers together the way he did when patients brought him bad news. UW is a good school, I offered. And the program's incredible. They have one of the best human-centered design labs in the country. You had Yale scores, my mother said flatly. And you're wasting them on app development. I opened my mouth to explain again that it wasn't about apps, that I wanted to build digital systems that helped people, maybe even help reform the mess of communication in healthcare. But I could already see the conversation was over. Dad stood, adjusting his shirt cuffs. You're smart enough to do anything, and you're choosing this. This became the word they used for my degree, for my work, for anything I did that didn't fit their frame. My first dorm room sat on the 5th floor of a brutalist concrete building near the engineering quad. It was tiny, with a twin bed by the window and a desk that wobbled every time I typed too hard. I didn't decorate, not at first. I didn't hang posters or string lights like my suite mates. My rebellion wasn't loud. It was quiet, steady, full of intention. In that room, I breathed differently. No judgment over my class schedule, no side eyes when I pulled out my laptop at dinner. No questions about when I'd come to my senses and switched to something more respectable. Just me, my code, and the soft hum of Seattle rain tapping against the window. That's where I met Naomi Lee. We were paired together in a first-year programming lab, both of us sitting in the front row while half the class scrolled through Reddit. Naomi had a sharp, inquisitive look about her, with short, choppy hair dyed the color of wet asphalt, and a voice that never apologized for taking up space. While others struggled with compiling basic scripts, Naomi was adding animations for fun. When I saw her side project, a visual calendar app she'd built from scratch, I blurted out, "That's beautiful." She turned to me, eyebrow raised. "Most people say, cool. You said beautiful." I like that. That's how it started. Coffee after class, late-night debugging sessions that spilled into philosophical tangents about ethics in tech, long walks by Lake Union, trading stories about the gap between what we were told to become and who we actually were. Naomi's father had been a pediatrician. Her mother ran a community clinic. She was supposed to go pre-med too. But after a nurse forgot to update her mother's chart during a hospital stay, resulting in a near-fatal drug interaction, Naomi redirected all that medical ambition into technology. "Doctors can save lives," she told me once, sitting cross-legged on my dorm floor, sketching ideas on a pizza box. But what good are miracles if no one can communicate what happened? That question planted something, a seed I didn't know we'd water for years to come. We began keeping a shared folder on our cloud drive, Rebuild Healthcare, half joke, half manifesto. In it were notes on patient record access, ideas for interface features that translated complex charts into plain English, and clippings of articles about hospital inefficiencies and tragic mistakes. One night, we stayed up until 3 a.m. watching a documentary about an elderly woman who died because her test results were emailed to the wrong provider. When it ended, neither of us spoke for a long time. Then Naomi said, "I'm tired of watching this happen. Let's fix it. We didn't know it then." But that was the beginning of what would become MedLink. Back home, no one asked what I was working on. When my mother did call, it was usually to check if I'd changed my major. Once, she left a voicemail saying she had a contact at a law firm in Bellevue who could help me pivot back into something more stable. I never returned the call. Sometimes, I imagined what it would feel like if I could show her what we were building, a platform that let patients access their medical data securely, translate jargon into layman's terms, send questions to providers without playing phone tag or feeling stupid. I imagined her saying, "You made this not with skepticism, but with pride." But she never asked, so I never offered. I spent that first year coding between shifts at a campus cafe, crashing on Naomi's floor during snowstorms, and testing beta tools on our classmates who thought we were just playing around. They didn't see the fire beneath our quiet, the blueprint forming beneath every late-night iteration. By spring, we had a rudimentary prototype, ugly, buggy, but it worked. You could log in, pull up medical records, and ask simple questions. What does this lab result mean? When is my next appointment? And the system would break it down, clean and kind. Naomi cried when it finally ran without crashing. So did I. Not because it was perfect, not because it would change the world overnight, but because in that moment, sitting on a dorm floor with cold ramen and 78 cents in my bank account, I felt something I'd never felt in my parents' house, purpose. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a failure. I felt free. We found the garage on Craigslist. It belonged to Naomi's aunt, who had recently retired and moved to Arizona, leaving behind a dusty one-car shelter tucked behind a narrow craftsman-style house in West Seattle. It had cracked cement floors, no insulation, and smelled faintly of old paint and mildew. But to us, it felt like the beginning of something. We cleared it out in a weekend, dragging rusted shelves to the curb and scrubbing the windows until they reluctantly let in light. We hauled in 2 desks from a thrift store, a whiteboard Naomi salvaged from campus, and a folding table I found on the sidewalk. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. We pinned printouts to the walls with painter's tape wireframes, feature maps, user flow charts. Every inch of space whispered potential. We worked long hours, fueled by instant coffee and ramen, fingers numb from the cold in winter and stuck to our keyboards with sweat in the summer. Naomi coded with laser focus, while I refined workflows and mocked up screens and design tools that kept crashing on my outdated laptop. We didn't have seed funding. We didn't even have heat. But we had vision. MedLink, though we weren't calling it that yet, started to take shape as a real tool, a login portal, a message system, a way for patients to actually understand what their doctors were saying without needing a second degree. We knew the system was broken. We just didn't know how badly until hospital administrators began replying to our cold emails with lines like, "You've read our minds. And when can we see a demo?" We registered the LLC with $75 each, filed our first provisional patent, landed a spot in a local entrepreneurship challenge, and took second place, which meant a small grant just enough to keep the lights on and upgrade to better hosting. Outside the garage, the world didn't notice, and inside my family, it was like nothing had changed. One afternoon, after Naomi and I had just hit a breakthrough in syncing third-party data from electronic health records, I called my mom. I don't know what I was hoping for. Maybe to share the tiny celebration, to feel even one voice cheering for me from home. She picked up on the second ring. "Oh, Rachel," she said, distracted. I could hear the clink of dishes in the background. "How are things good?" I said, "Actually really good. We just figured out a way to integrate test results into a unified dashboard. It's the kind of thing hospitals usually outsource to 5 different vendors. But She cut me off gently. That's nice. Sweetie, so you're still doing that IT support work? I paused. I'm building a platform. Naomi and I, my co-founder, we're running a startup now. We have early adopters and funding lined up. There was a pause on her end. 2. Well, that's something, she said finally. Just don't overwork yourself. You know these little projects can get tiring. At least Ethan's bringing real value to the world. I didn't respond. It wasn't the first time I'd heard a version of that sentence. But somehow, that day, in that moment, it lodged itself deeper, as if all my late nights and frayed bank accounts and quiet victories could be dismissed with a single shrug. I stared at the duct tape holding up our makeshift server unit and swallowed the heat behind my eyes. She didn't mean it cruelly. That was the hardest part. She meant it honestly. That evening, Naomi found me sitting on the garage floor, staring at the whiteboard in silence. Rough call, she asked, sliding me a half-melted granola bar. I nodded. My mom thinks we're running a help desk. Naomi didn't laugh. She didn't say, "Screw them," or try to distract me. She just sat beside me, leaned her head against the wall and said, "Let them think that. We'll show them later. Later." That was the word I held on to. Not revenge, not approval. Just later, as in, keep building, keep moving. Let time do the explaining. So we kept going. The garage became our world, humid in the summer, brittle in the winter, bursting with ideas year-round. Some nights we left after midnight, shoes soaked from rain, too tired to talk but buzzing with something quiet and electric. No one from my family ever asked to visit. They never saw the sticky notes on the door or the string lights we put up one evening when the power kept flickering. They didn't see me. Not really. But I was finally learning to see myself. And in the silence of that small garage, I started to believe that maybe building something that matters doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes with cracked floors and cold coffee and one person beside you who says, "Keep going." And so I did. Some nights, I woke up at 3 a.m., with code running behind my eyelids, not dreams, exactly more like puzzle pieces shifting just out of reach. I'd sit up in the dark, reach for my notebook without turning on the light, and scribble a solution before it dissolved. That was what building MedLink looked like. Not launch parties, not press coverage, just line after line of fragile code stitched together between stretches of exhaustion and doubt. By the time we landed our first real client, a mid-sized clinic in Tacoma, we'd gone 4 months without a proper paycheck. Naomi had maxed out a credit card. I'd started freelancing on the side, editing medical databases for a pharmaceutical company just to cover rent. Our garage-turned-office still didn't have insulation, and our tiny space heater had a habit of shutting off right before sunrise. I learned to type in fingerless gloves. The hospital contract didn't come with a ceremony, just a signed PDF and a brief call with a tired administrator named Dr. Chin, who said, "If this does what you claim, it could save us 2 hours of admin work per patient. That's a miracle." I stared at that email for a full minute before turning to Naomi, who was slumped in a folding chair, half asleep over her laptop. "We got it," I said. She didn't jump up or scream, she just exhaled, closed her laptop slowly, and nodded. "Then we'd better not screw it up." We didn't. The pilot ran for 3 months, and by the end of it, The hospital reported fewer communication errors and higher patient satisfaction. That win led to another small contract, then another. Word spread faster than we expected. Investors started calling. Not many, but enough to make us nervous. A venture group in San Jose invited us to pitch. I wore my best pair of jeans and borrowed a blazer from Naomi. Our slide deck was scrappy, but we spoke clearly. We didn't try to sound like anyone else. That, apparently, was what made them lean in. When the first offer came, a convertible note of $250,000, I should have felt elated. I did, briefly. But it was followed by something else, a creeping sense of exposure. The more MedLink grew, the more people wanted to know who was behind it. Naomi didn't hesitate to step into the spotlight. She was good at it, articulate, strategic, magnetic in a way that made reporters listen closely. Whenever we were featured in small publications or startup newsletters, her face appeared next to quotes about our mission. I was fine with that. I encouraged it. Actually, I told her I preferred to stay behind the scenes, to focus on the product. The truth was harder to explain. It wasn't that I didn't want to be seen. It was that I didn't trust what would happen if I imagined the press releases, the LinkedIn resharing, the inevitable phone call from my mother, the one that would start with surprised politeness and end with a narrative she'd rewritten. Well, we always said Rachel was smart. She just took a while to figure it out. It wouldn't be admiration. It would be ownership. As if success, once made visible, suddenly became part of the family legacy they never supported, but would now proudly display. I wasn't ready for that. Maybe I never would be. So I became the ghost founder. In articles. I was mentioned by first name only. In photos. I stood out of frame or blurred in the background. I skipped panels and media interviews. I even turned down a feature in a Women in Tech series because they insisted on a headshot and bio. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent years craving recognition. Now I was building something extraordinary and choosing invisibility. But this wasn't shame. It was protection. Some people don't get that. They think silence means insecurity or passivity. For me, it meant control. A way to keep something precious away from the people who'd spent years telling me I was nothing special until they had a reason to claim me. Sometimes Naomi asked gently, "Are you sure you don't want to take more credit?" I'd smile and say, "Later." Then change the subject. But I could see the questions in her eyes. She didn't push. She didn't need to. She already knew I wasn't hiding from the world. I was just setting the terms for when, how, and if I'd ever be truly seen by it. And in that quiet choice, I found a strange kind of freedom, while others measured success by how many people applauded. I learned to measure mine by how clearly I heard my own voice in the work. Every new user, every bug fixed, every feature that actually helped someone, those were the things that mattered. Not the spotlight, not the headlines, just the build, just the belief. And that, in the end, was enough to keep going. The invitation came by email, not phone. A forwarded message from my mother with no greeting, no personal note, just the name of the restaurant, the date, and the subject line Ethan's engagement dinner. Formal attire. I stared at it for a few minutes before clicking it open. The venue was Blue Orchid, one of those rooftop places in San Francisco with a wait list 3 months long and wine lists longer than most novels. Of course, Ethan's fiancée, Samantha, was polished, pedigreed, and connected. She worked in corporate healthcare, the kind of woman my parents described in glowing terms. Even before meeting her, I replied with a simple, "I'll be there." No one responded. 3 days before the dinner, my father called. It was rare for him to initiate contact. Even rarer for him to ask how I was. This time was no different. "I hope you're planning to wear something appropriate," he said. After a few seconds of stiff pleasantries, I blinked. "Excuse me. It's a high-end venue. The Winters are very accomplished people. Just make an effort." I knew what he meant. Don't embarrass us. Don't wear anything too simple, too serious, too much like yourself. "I'll find something," I said. Then ended the call before he could comment further. The day of the dinner, I wore a black satin dress that skimmed just past the knee, tailored, understated. I paired it with small gold hoops and low heels. Simple makeup. Nothing performative. Just me, in full possession of who I had become. When I stepped into the private dining room, the hum of polite conversation quieted for a moment. My mother glanced up from the table arrangement and gave me a tight smile. "Oh, good. You made it," she said. "We've seated you next to Cousin Margaret. You always got along well. Translation out of sight, away from the front of the room." Ethan walked over a moment later, all charm and dimples. He hugged me casually, as if we hadn't spoken in over a year. "Glad you're here. Rach, come meet Samantha." She stood near the window, tall and poised in a burgundy sheath dress. Her hair was swept into a low chignon, and her heels probably cost more than my rent in college. Still, there was a quiet alertness in her eyes I recognized instantly. "Samantha," Ethan said, "this is my sister, Rachel." She extended her hand, smiling. "It's so nice to finally meet you. Ethan talks about you all the time. I doubted that, but I smiled and shook her hand. Congratulations. You two seem like a good match." "Thank you." She studied me for a second longer than most people do at introductions. Something flickered in her expression. But she didn't say anything else. Not yet. We were seated, and toasts began. My father stood first, lifting his glass. "To my son, Ethan," he said, his voice heavy with pride, "who has made us proud every day of his life, and to Samantha, a brilliant addition to our family." My mother followed with a carefully rehearsed speech, recounting Ethan's childhood milestones like she was presenting at an awards show. When the glasses clinked and the courses were served, I stayed quiet, engaging in small talk with Cousin Margaret about traffic and wine. I wasn't there to make a point. I was there to observe, to show up, to be who I was, whether they noticed or not. Samantha kept glancing at me during the meal. It wasn't intrusive, just thoughtful, curious. Halfway through the second course, she leaned slightly across the table. "Forgive me," she said, "but is your full name Rachel Carter?" I nodded. "Yes." She tilted her head, frowning slightly. "From Seattle, I set down my fork." "Yes," I said slowly. "Why?" There was a beat of silence. Then her eyes widened. "Oh my God." She said, "You're the co-founder of MedLink." All conversation around us stopped. I could feel my parents' attention snap to us, could see Ethan freeze beside her. Samantha looked from me to Ethan, then back again. "You're the Rachel Carter. Our team has been reviewing your platform for 6 months. We're in the final stages of a $200 million acquisition proposal." I'm leading it. My father blinked rapidly. My mother's mouth opened, then closed. No one spoke. Ethan looked dazed. Wait, what? That's your company? I nodded once, calmly. Yes. Naomi and I started it 6 years ago. The room was silent. Someone dropped a spoon. I had no idea, Samantha said, her voice soft but steady. Your design work is incredible. We've been trying to build something even half as intuitive. But honestly, MedLink's miles ahead. My mother finally found her voice. Why didn't you tell us? I met her eyes? Not unkindly, because you never asked. The silence that followed Samantha's words wasn't dramatic, it was surgical. Sharp, still, and immediate. The kind that cuts through every clink of silverware and quiet murmur in the room. The kind of silence you feel in your chest. Ethan turned toward me slowly, his brow furrowed as if trying to reassemble a puzzle he didn't realize had been broken. You're the CEO, he asked, almost too quietly to hear. You built MedLink. I met his eyes and nodded. Yes. My mother blinked rapidly, her hand tightening around the stem of her wine glass. But why would you keep something like that from us? Her voice sounded strained, almost rehearsed. We've always encouraged your work. It was such a quick pivot. I almost admired it. My father jumped in next. I've mentioned to my colleagues that you were doing something impressive in tech. We've always known you were capable. I didn't laugh. I didn't call them out. I simply tilted my head. You once told me to apply for admin jobs at Ethan's hospital because I'd eventually need something stable. I said, my voice calm. You thought this was just a phase. My mother looked stung. We were just concerned about your future. You weren't telling us much. I wasn't telling you because whenever I tried, you changed the subject. I replied. I shared what I was working on, once. You said it was cute. Then asked me if I had considered law school again. I wasn't bitter, just factual. I'd replayed these memories enough times in my head that they didn't sting anymore. They were just data. Samantha stepped in, perhaps sensing how hard my parents were trying to rewrite the past in real time. She's not just the CEO, she said, her voice measured but firm. She's revolutionizing how providers communicate with patients. MedLink has cut information errors at 2 major health systems by over 60%. It's intuitive, scalable, and the best interface I've seen in my 10 years in digital health. Her eyes shifted to me, and there was no condescension in them, only clarity. People in our industry talk about Rachel like she's a ghost genius. Now I see why. Ethan looked like he'd been winded. Why didn't you ever tell me, he asked. Softer now, less stunned than simply hurt. I thought we were close. I placed my fork down and folded my hands. We weren't. I said, not unkindly. You assumed we were because I didn't correct you. But there wasn't space for me in this family, not the real me. Not the one who builds systems instead of saving lives in scrubs. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked down at his plate, unsure where to file this new version of me. My father cleared his throat. Well, this is certainly a surprise, but maybe it's time we all reset. We're proud of you. Rachel? Truly. I nodded slowly. Thank you. But pride that arrives after proof isn't the same. The table stayed quiet after that. I didn't need more. I didn't need an apology or an excuse or a round of applause. What I needed was already mine, the knowledge that everything I'd built, I'd done without their permission. And I would continue to build, on my own terms, around us. The dinner picked back up. Quiet conversations resumed, glasses refilled, but the tone had shifted. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't the afterthought or the outlier. I was the story they had missed, and I was okay with that. They chose a hotel restaurant near Union Square. White tablecloths, soft jazz, servers in crisp uniforms. It was the kind of place my parents always preferred, public enough for appearances, polished enough to feel like control. I arrived a few minutes early. I didn't need the upper hand, but I wanted to be settled before they got there. I chose a seat by the window, ordered coffee, and waited. The sunlight was sharp that morning, and the clink of flatware from other tables felt oddly loud. I adjusted my sleeves, not out of nerves, but because old habits die slowly. They walked in together. My mother wore a beige blazer and her usual pearl earrings. My father was in a charcoal suit, even though it was Sunday. He scanned the room until he saw me, then offered a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. My mother waved lightly and mouthed, "There you are," as if we'd simply been trying to find each other in a crowd. We exchanged greetings, sat down, and opened menus we didn't need. No one mentioned last night. No one asked how I slept. We placed our orders. My mother chose an egg white omelet, my father the French toast, and the silence stretched just long enough to make the first move feel like surrender. It was my mother who broke it. "We read the article this morning." She said, "The one in MedTech Weekly, about your platform." I nodded. "It was written 6 months ago. Samantha asked for it to be reissued after the acquisition talks advanced." My father cleared his throat. "I didn't realize the scope of what you'd built." "It's impressive." "Thank you." Another pause. "You should have told us," my mother said. "Softer now. We could have, I don't know, supported you." I looked at her, not with anger, but with a steady calm I'd earned the hard way. "I didn't tell you because I didn't need to." I said, and if I'm being honest, I didn't trust what would happen if I did. My father frowned slightly. "You think we would have claimed credit?" "I think," I replied, "that if things had gone well, you might have folded them into a version of the story where you were quietly proud all along. And if they hadn't, it would have reinforced what you already believed, that I was off track." My mother's eyes dropped to her napkin. "We just wanted what was best for you," she said. "Tech always felt so unstable. What you wanted," I said gently, "was for me to follow a path you understood. Medicine, law, something you could explain to your friends without effort. Something that looked good on paper." My father shifted in his seat, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "Rachel," he said, "we might not have shown it, but we always knew you were capable." I offered a small smile. "I know you saw my intelligence. That's not the same as seeing me." He blinked, and for once had no response. I took a slow sip of coffee, then said what I'd carried for years. "I'm not angry. I told them, but I've spent a long time mistaking conditional approval for love. I don't want that anymore." My mother looked up. "What does that mean?" "It means I don't need validation. I don't need applause. But I need honesty. I need respect. Because love without respect isn't love. It's expectation." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. We ate in near silence after that. The occasional clatter of a fork, the only interruption. They didn't argue. They didn't deny. And strangely, I didn't need them to. Saying it out loud was enough. When the bill came, my father reached for it reflexively. But I waved him off. "I've got it." He looked surprised, but didn't protest. Outside, the city was already buzzing with late-morning shoppers and couples pushing strollers. We stood for a beat on the sidewalk. "Will you keep us updated?" my mother asked. I nodded. "I'll let you know what matters. Not everything needs to be shared. She looked like she wanted to say something else, maybe to rewrite the moment. But she didn't. She just touched my arm lightly, then stepped back. We said goodbye without hugs. It wasn't cold, just unfinished. And that felt okay. Not every story ends in reconciliation. Some just shift enough to keep going, a little more honestly than before. The first thing I noticed when I walked back into my office in Seattle was the light. It poured in through the east-facing windows, soft and steady, painting gold across the walls we'd once taped sketches to. The place was quieter than usual. Naomi was in London overseeing a new implementation, and our operations team was off-site. I slipped off my coat, brewed a cup of tea, and opened my laptop. My inbox had the usual flood of updates and investor threads. But one subject line stood out: Q2 summary, team highlights, and client metrics. I clicked it open and read through slowly. Our platform had surpassed projections for the third quarter in a row. Usage was up, patient feedback remained overwhelmingly positive, and we were now officially integrated across more than 300 clinics nationwide. I scrolled to the end and saw a small note from our team's newest UX engineer. "Thank you for building something that actually listens to patients. It makes my job feel meaningful." I sat back and let that land. It would have meant something at any point in my life. But today, it meant more, not because it validated me, but because it mirrored what I'd always wanted this to be. Not an empire, not revenge, just something that worked, something that mattered. A few weeks had passed since the engagement dinner, but the emotional echo of it still hung faintly in my chest, no longer sharp. Just there. Ethan had reached out the next day. No dramatic apology, just a long message that ended with, "I really didn't see you, but I'm trying to now. I hope that still matters." It did. Not because I needed it, but because it was honest. Since then, we'd talked more, nothing heavy. Just siblings getting reacquainted without the unspoken competition between us. We'd even shared a laugh over brunch about how our parents were suddenly so proud of their visionary daughter in healthcare. Samantha, to her credit, never tried to smooth anything over. She simply treated me like an equal, like someone she wanted to work with, and maybe slowly someone she wanted to know. At MedLink, life moved forward with clarity, and with it, so did I. Once a month, I now host a mentorship circle for high school girls interested in tech. We meet in the conference room, where the chairs are always a little too big for them, and the questions they ask are always a little too brave. They remind me of who I used to be: curious, underestimated, reaching for something that hadn't quite taken shape yet. One of them, Ava, asked me last week, "What do you do when your family doesn't get it?" I didn't pause. "You build anyway," I said, "and you find people who do." I'd stopped waiting for certain conversations to happen. I no longer hovered over old memories, wondering when they'd make room for me. I had found my own rooms. And now, I opened the door for others to walk through. Success, I've learned, isn't a single moment. It's not the acquisition offer or the article or even the stunned silence at a dinner table. It's the quiet choices that stack over time, the ones that say, "This is who I am," even if no one's watching. That's the kind of success no one can take from you, not even those who once refused to see you. As I finished reading the report, I glanced at the photo on my desk. It was one of the only framed things I allowed myself, me and Naomi, in the garage, back when we'd finally gotten the beta version to stop crashing. We looked exhausted and elated, no makeup, no filters, just two women who hadn't asked for permission. and didn't need it. I turned back to the screen and opened a new email draft, something for our next internal memo. A reminder to the team, and maybe to myself. I didn't build MedLink to prove them wrong. I built it to prove I was always right to believe in myself. If any part of my story felt familiar to you, if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told that your dreams were too small or too strange, I want you to know this. You're not alone. Maybe you're still building in silence. Maybe you're still waiting to be seen. Or maybe, like me, you've stopped waiting and started creating on your own terms. What did you have to believe in, even when no one else did? And what are you building now, not to prove them wrong, but to honor the version of yourself that never gave up? If this story spoke to something in you, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you want more stories like this about quiet strength, healing, and finding your path even when it doesn't look like anyone else's, make sure to subscribe, click the bell, and stay close. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we almost didn't tell. Thanks for listening.